Hi everyone. Thank you. Welcome for coming. My name is Daryl Sulierlam. I am the Mental Health and Wellness Manager with the IPHCC, the Indigenous Primary Healthcare Council. I am super delighted to introduce our speaker, our guest speaker today, Mr. or Dr. Ed Connors, who is Mohawk of Ganawage. I hope I said that right, Ed. Ganawage.
Close.
Ganawage.
Kanawagi, there you got it.
Mohawk character. I even practiced and I messed it up. So Ganawage Mohawk territory and of Irish ancestry. He's a psychologist who's worked with First Nations communities across Canada since 1982 in both urban and rural centers. His work over this time has included clinical director for an infant mental health center in the city of Regina and and director for the Sacred Circle, a suicide prevention program developed to serve First Nations communities in Northwestern Ontario. Dr. Connors' most recent work has involved development of Indigenous life promotion projects, including Feather Carriers Leadership for Life Promotion. While developing the above services, Dr. Connor has worked with elders and apprenticed in traditional First Nations approaches to healing. Today, his practice incorporates traditional knowledge about healing while also employing his training as a psychologist. His work has included consultation and community training to assist First Nations in the development of restorative justice programs, Indigenous life promotion, and peacemaking and reconciliation. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Dr. Connors. Take it away.
Thank you, Daryl. Miigwech, Nyawa. Thank you, all of you who have chosen to come and share with us as I tell you a little bit about my aspects of my life journey, which actually has incorporated over 40 years, as Daryl had mentioned, of learning and ongoing learning about Indigenous health and healing practices as they have been in the past and how they have become in the present and how perhaps they might unfold and are in fact unfolding in the present and moving into our futures. So as I was introduced as Ed Connors, I'm also known as Tecumseh. I'm Mohawk and Irish ancestry from Ganawage, as well as from the town of Mount Royal. My mother was born and raised in Ganawage, my father, town of Mount Royal, which overlooks Montreal, and the mountain that overlooks Montreal. And my father, of course, is of Irish ancestry, my mother of Mohawk or Ganagahaga. I'm also Wolf Clan. We're matrilineal in the ways in which we pass our clans. So that my mother and father actually came from, in many ways, as I often say, from two sides of the river, the St. Lawrence River in specific. And there is a bridge, interestingly enough, that connects the two sides of the St. Lawrence and lands in our community of Ganawage. Some of you who have followed some of our history may know of some of the times in which, in the more recent times, we have actually acted to block the bridge as protest to some of the things that were happening in our communities and to our communities, actually, from outside influences. And so the interesting thing for me is that there is a kind of a metaphor that lies within the actual structures that of the two sides of the river connecting. Because it was in part because of that bridge that my parents actually met one another and then fell in love, and I was the product of one of the products. I have two sisters as well of their loving relationship, which lasted for well over 60 years, 70 years, in fact, when my father passed at age 90 and my mother at age 97. Yeah, I'm as was mentioned as well. Daryl mentioned I'm a psychologist by academic training. However, because of my interest in my ancestry and learning about my history and where I have come from, specifically my Indigenous ancestry, but then ultimately also my Irish ancestry, I developed a real interest in what our healing practices had been, not only in the present, but what they had been in the past, and then how they are evolving currently. So what I'm going to share with you today is some of the experiences that I've had as I've journeyed across the country, as I say, from shore to shore to shore to border. In that time of those over 40 years, I've worked with our communities across the country and learned from many of our elders and healers and medicine people about those practices that have been not only of the past, but are truly of the present and are emerging once again. So I just acknowledge them. And as we start, I'm going to start with what they've taught me, which is to begin at the beginning and to understand Indigenous knowledge about health, healing, and wellness. We need to, first of all, understand where it all comes from. And from my teachers, the direction that I was given and the ways I was taught was that it all comes from Creator. And the beginning of all of our knowledge, and in fact, the beginnings of our existence, and the existence of all of creation comes from Creator. And I don't speak to that as one Creator. I speak to it as a Creator that recognizes and is present in all forms of life and is spoken to and addressed in many names in many ways. But as we start, I say that the teachings that I have about health, healing, and wellness start at this point. It starts with the understanding that we are all part of creation, that Creator created everything as equal to each other, nothing greater than and nothing less than. And that when we begin in our words, and comes through my Haudenosaunee ancestry, specifically some of our teachings from my Ganakahaga ancestry, is that where we begin and when we begin in our sharing and understanding of our knowledge of healing and wellness, that we need to begin with a recognition of Creator and a thanks and giving thanks to Creator, expressing our gratitude to all of creation for the ways in which it supports our lives. All of creation does so. So I'm going to begin with what we call the words before all words, which is a Thanksgiving address or the prayers of gratitude. And so I'm going to share with you some images as we do this, because the images also reinforce, in fact, what I'm sharing with you. I know that you have the ability, all of you, to in fact image for yourself, but I'm going to share these words and share the images with you. So as we open, I draw our minds together to recognize all of creation and all our relations. And all those relations are not just all our human relations, but they are all of creation. Everything in creation are our relations. So I begin with these words. Tecumseh, we give thanks, Creator, we're grateful. We give thanks for this day. We're grateful for Brother Sun, who brings the light to this day so that we can see and appreciate the beauty of all of your creation. And we're grateful for the warmth that Brother Sun brings to Mother Earth so that all of creation can grow to the fullest of their potential. We give thanks and we're grateful, Creator, for the trees and for the plants. We're especially grateful for those trees and plants who have given of their lives in support of our lives so that we might live. And we give thanks and we're grateful, Creator, for those healing medicines that come through the Eastern doorway that bring to us the gifts to help us to heal our physical being so that we might live in peace this day with all of your creation. We give thanks, Creator, and we're grateful for the healing spirit that comes this day through the Southern doorway. We're grateful for the waters, the medicine waters that give life to all of your creation. We're grateful for the water beings that live within those waters. We give thanks to those who have given of their lives in support of our lives so that we might live. And we're grateful and we give thanks, Creator, for the healing spirit that comes this day through the Southern doorway, that brings to us the gifts to help us to wash away the hurts and pains from our hearts and from our minds so that we might live in peace this day with all of your creation. For these gifts we're grateful. We're grateful, Creator. We give thanks for this day. We're grateful for Grandmother Moon, who rises in the sky and guides us in the cycles of life and death. We're grateful for the female side of life especially, and for their special work with all of your creation. We give thanks and we're grateful, Creator, for the healing spirits that come at night in the form of dreams that come through the Western doorway, that bring to us the gifts to help us to see more clearly, to hear more clearly, to think more clearly, and to speak more clearly. And we give thanks and we're grateful, Creator, for our winged brothers and sisters who guide us, teach us, and nurture us with their gifts. And we give thanks to those who have given of their lives in support of our lives so that we might live. And we give thanks to those who help us to wipe away the hurts and pains from our minds and from our hearts so that we might live in peace this day with all of your creation. For these gifts we are grateful. O Bojoma Shomas Bojona Comas Tecumseh, we give thanks, Creator, for this day, We're grateful for the great white spirit bear brother and sister who guide us, teach us, and nurture us on our spiritual healing journeys. And we give thanks and grateful to the four-leggeds who guide us, teach us, and nurture us with their gifts. And we give thanks to those who have given of their lives in support of our lives so that we might live. We're grateful and we give thanks, Creator, for the healing spirit that comes this day through the northern doorway, brings to us the gifts to help us to wash away the hurts and pains from our minds and from our hearts, from our spirit. We're grateful especially that they provide to us the gifts that help us to endure the most difficult times of our lives so that we might go through these times and become stronger and better human beings for them. For these gifts, we're grateful. We give thanks and we're grateful, Creator, for the healing spirit that comes this day through Mother Earth. We're grateful for her continued love and care and nurturing of our lives, despite the disrespect and the harm that we've caused her. We're grateful that she continues to love us, care for us, and nurture us. And by doing so, she teaches us the lessons of unconditional love. For these gifts, we are grateful. And we give thanks and we're grateful, Creator, for the healing spirit that comes this day through your sky world. We're grateful for the great thunder being who brings the waters, the medicine waters, to Mother Earth to heal her, cleanse her, and nurture her so that she can continue to support our lives. And we give thanks and we're grateful, Creator, for the four winds that cleanse the air we breathe and bring to us the gifts of the four seasons. For these gifts, we're grateful. And we give thanks and we're grateful, Creator, for all those in your universe, for the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the planets, that they continue to live together in harmony and in balance. And by doing so, they teach us the lessons we need to know to live in peace with all of your creation. And we finally, Creator, give thanks to you for the healing that you continue to provide to Mother Earth, that you heal her, cleanse her, and nurture her, so that she can provide us with the medicines and the medicine people who continue to help us on our healing journeys. And we give thanks and we're grateful, Creator, that you continue to care for our elders in the latter parts of their days, that they might live in peace and harmony with all of your creation for the remainder of their days. And we're grateful, Creator, that you continue to care for and guide those spirits that are now on their spirit journey, returning to live with their ancestors. And we give thanks and we're grateful, Creator, for the spirit guide that guides us on our life's journey. For all of these things, we're grateful, Creator, and we give thanks. For those things that we have forgotten, we now draw to mind, and we give thanks for, and say, Miigwech, now all our relations, now our minds are as one. So given those thoughts and those reflections, that is indeed where we begin. And I'm going to move over to another piece that now will bring you into some of what I've learned for over 40 years of working across our country. And this is some of the reflections that I've made as I've been learning about health, healing, and wellness from an Indigenous perspective and an Indigenous worldview. And I use this introduction to help you to understand the concept of another way of thinking. And I've sometimes referred to this as the two minds. And this teaching is about, what happened when we came into contact with those who came from across the waters. And when they came to this land with another mind, another worldview, another way of knowing themselves, each other, and all of creation, different from what our ancestors on Turtle Island or North America had once and still do see, and we still understand and can see this way. But we were seeing predominantly this way as this worldview that I'm going to share with you and draw our minds to once again. Because I do believe that there is a large movement that's happening within our Indigenous communities around health and wellness, which is a return to knowledge that we had prior to contact, a way of seeing, a way of knowing, a way of understanding ourselves in relationship with ourselves, with each other, with all of creation, with Creator. That way of knowing, is embedded within some of what I have shared with you in the Thanksgiving address. And it's really typified by a teaching that I received from one of my elders, Alex Geed, when I worked in Treaty 3. And he was one who introduced me to help me to see this way of knowing and thinking once again. Because through colonization, the experience of contact with the people who came here with their ways of knowing our minds were changed. Our minds became shifted to a way of knowing that was different from what we had initially had in our minds. So what I just shared with you is the definition of the worldview, one of many. There's many ways that we can understand this concept of more than one mind that exists in the world today. And we could actually say there are many different forms of minds, and they're culturally influenced. They're influenced by the languages that we speak from around the world. And those who have the original languages or indigenous languages that came from the experiences of relationship with Mother Earth and with all of creation formed a way of thinking that was expressed through our languages that is what we today now often refer to as a holistic or systemic mind. The ability to be able to see all things as related and interconnected, and being able to then not only see the world that way, but then to actually understand ourselves in relationship with the world in that form. And as I was talking about Alex Skeed, who was from Treaty 3, who was one of my elders when I worked in that region, he introduced me to this concept of the different worldview of the Indigenous mind when we were actually working together around suicide prevention. We were introduced to this is over 35 years ago, and I'll share with you some of my slides related to this. But when he introduced it to me, he basically had helped a number of us to understand what we really were needing to look at in terms of suicide prevention from an Indigenous worldview, from a different mind. And when he introduced that to us, there was a one point where I was sitting with him and we were waiting for elders and youth to come join us. And we had begun to share this concept of life promotion through what we called the sacred circle. And when the youth and the elders were coming to sit with us, we had set up a circle and we were waiting for their arrival. And he was telling me he was looking out the window at the beauty of the Lake of the Woods. And as he's looking out the window, he's talking about all of what's out there in creation, Creator has given to us, everything we need to live a long and good life. And he was saying we only need to understand and develop that mind once again that will enable us to be able to utilize all of what we've been given to live those long and good lives that we're intended to. And when he was saying that, all of a sudden he stopped in mid-sentence and he looked down under my chair and there was a little ant that was crawling into the circle towards the big drum. And as he looked at that, he said to me, he said, "See that ant?" And I looked down and I saw the ant and I said, "Yes." And he said, "That's my brother." And then he paused for a second and then he said, "He's no greater than I, and I'm no greater than him. He's my brother." And then he said, "When we can form that mind once again, then we will know how to live in peace with all of creation once again on earth." So what he was really drawing my attention to, and I've thought about that many times and shared it now many times, he was drawing my attention to the fact that our minds had changed. We had formerly a mind that enabled us to be able to see and think of everything in creation as equal to, not greater than nor less than. And that's the change of our minds came about, when the two worldviews, the worldview that was brought here by those who came here was introduced to us and then actually enforced upon us. And that's what we call colonization. And that whole process then changed our thinking from being able to see and think that way to, in fact, we were forced into thinking then as everything greater than and less than. Including humans and everything then going down to the beginnings of what they perceive as being the beginning of the lowest life forms. That mind is the mind that has been brought by colonization and forced upon us. There is a teaching that comes with our teachings from my Ganagahaga ancestors, which comes in the form of what we call the wampum belts. Those wampum belts were belts that were created in order to create peace with one another, even before contact. And these belts actually are treaty belts. They actually define and describe the nature of the relationships between ourselves and others of our nations across Turtle Island. And we use these belts in order to create these peaceful relationships, and then to remember what it was that we had actually defined as being a peaceful relationship and what it takes for us to be able to actually develop those relationships and then to maintain them. So this belt, which is called the two-row, is one that was actually presented at the time of contact with the Dutch between my ancestors, the Caughnawaga, and the Dutch who landed in the regions of what we now call New York State, which was our traditional territories. When we came in contact, we recognized that they were very different from us. And we in fact realized, as we had from prior history, that when we came across people who were different and had different languages, and different customs and cultures than our own, which were many across Turtle Island, that we had to find ways to create a peaceful relationship. And so this belt was fashioned and is shared with the Dutch, and was basically, I'll tell you that it held the knowledge of what we call now today, and we had it, throughout our history as Haudenosaunee. When we developed and had brought to us what we call the Great Law of Peace, we were given then the teachings of the great law that had enabled us to develop what we call the great mind, or the good mind. And the good mind is one that then enables us to establish peace in our relationships with each other, with all of creation, and with Creator. In this two-row was then some of those teachings that spoke about what I've just shared with you, some of the concepts of equality, and then the concepts of difference, and how to see difference first in terms of looking at what was as once we saw people as equal to us, how we could then look at their differences with respect, and actually then understand how those differences actually could contribute to enhancing our lives, so that we could and then live long and good lives. So in that was then are the teachings that speak to those principles of equality and difference, which then leads to good relationship, friendship, and peace. So this is what we shared, but at the time when the Dutch received this belt from us, they actually wrote their treaty, and their treaty spoke then to difference as being lesser than or greater than. And they actually then, in this teaching, it speaks to the two rows of purple, speaking to them in their ships and us in our canoe. And it said that if we can go down the river of life, which is the white, then and don't swerve into the path of the other. We can live in peace on Mother Earth and share all of what's here, in order to live long and good lives. But when we saw their teachings spoke actually then in the written peace treaties that they wrote. Their treaty actually spoke about the terms of such that we were their children, they were our fathers, and they'll take care of us. Again, concepts of lesser than and greater than. And so, even our other ancestors, many of our ancestors actually saw this coming, recognized that there was this great difference, and spoke to it, and that they identified the two minds. Even this saying from Sitting Bull in 1876 spoke to it, and he said, if the Great Spirit had desired me to be a white man, he would have made me so in the first place. He put in your heart certain wishes and plans, and in my heart he put other different desires. Each man is good in his sight. It's not necessary for eagles to become crows. And we know, what that meant ultimately, because it led to this whole experience through colonization of the residential schools, which is only one step of the whole process of colonization, and which was focused on, again, the experience of attempting to change our minds, to shift our ways of knowing and thinking, to end our languages, so that there would not be a transmission of our ways of thinking and knowing, and then to implant then this other form of thought into our minds, and then change our culture. All of this, we know about, and we know that, now much more about it as we're, through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, much more has been shared by those who have gone through these experiences. But it didn't end us, and it didn't end our minds. The colonization process impacted us and affected us in such ways as you can see here. This was shared with us, and I share this in teachings that we do within the teachings that we call Feather Carriers Leadership for Life Promotion, which is part of our efforts to bring about the change of the thinking and a shift in thinking specifically about suicide and suicide prevention. And I'll speak to that shortly with you. But what we know, happened as a result of colonization is it shifted our understandings of who we are. It shifted us to the point that we actually have often struggled to know who we are. This little piece is one of the teachings that we share within the Feather Carriers that identifies how we have shifted our thinking and how it's been shifted in ways that, for some of us, if you read across the top, some people have become totally assimilated or totally changed their minds to that of the colonizer. And then there's people who are shifting now their thinking and moving back towards what we call traditional thought, or what is for those people who may be able to stay distant from the effects of colonization, which are fewer but still exist. And I've learned from and been with people that have been raised with not only our traditional or our initial languages, our indigenous languages, but also then all of our cultural practices. And those people, have been identified, you could identify them as more traditional in their ways of seeing and thinking and knowing, and they've maintained that original mind. There are people now who are shifting their thinking, and we call that those who are shifting identities towards reestablishing or new traditionalists is the way it's spoken of here. B. Shawanda, by the way, created these thoughts many years ago in teaching some of our understandings of healing practices within our residential substance use programs. So in this, we saw that as she traveled across the country and spoke to our people and many of our families, she recognized there are people who are now in the process of attempting to move their minds back to understanding that way that we once had. And that now we have people also who have established that, and they're able, we call them now, if they're people that actually have the ability of two-eyed seeing. Two-eyed seeing is a concept that comes out of the Mi'kmaq people from the East Coast, and their thinking and their understanding was that through contact, we ended up creating, in essence, two minds. And if we can hold to the mind that we once had, and then understand, as is described in the Turo Wampum, the ability to then use our traditional or our understandings of our initial knowledge and use that as a foundation, and then look out to those who have brought other ways of thinking and draw from them based on what our understanding is with our indigenous mind, what is helpful and useful. Then we can then, in fact, as is described in the Turo, be able then to enhance our lives, to live long and good lives. The unfortunate thing is that in this whole process of colonization, there are those that were identified and we identify as lost identities who don't know who they are and don't know where they've come from. And the end result has been that they basically have struggled in life, and they're typically the ones who struggle to live life and to live a long, good life, and often do not, because they have a difficulty understanding who they are and where they've come from. In our teachings with the feather carriers, we've actually drawn on some of the teachings that have come, as I've shared just some of those with you now, that have actually come from a number of different sources. There was an interesting piece that came about when we were doing meetings with the Canadian Association of Suicide Prevention. We invited keynote speakers to come to share some of their understanding of suicide from an Indigenous worldview. One of those individuals was Senator Murray Sinclair. And Murray had been actually one of the witnesses for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and heard many, many of the testimonies and stories of the impacts of colonization through residential schools on our people. And so as he listened to that over time, when he came to share what he had understood from what he had heard at the conference for the Canadian Association of Suicide Prevention, and he presented this keynote, he presented the thought that one of the things that he saw was a real struggle for our people was actually tied into what we had already started to develop in through what was called the Native Mental Health Association of Canada, that now is the First People's Wellness Circle. I'm on that board and have been for over 25 years. And along with the organization that we refer to as Thunderbird Partnership Foundation, which addresses our substance use issues nationally, we developed a concept. I'll show it to you here. It's not in here. I'll show it to you on the other one. We developed what's called the Mental Wellness Continuum Framework. I often call it the wellness continuum framework because it really is speaking to wellness from an Indigenous perspective. And if you go to First Peoples, or rather to thunderbirdpf.org, and I'll show you this in a few minutes, you can actually hook into what's called the mental wellness continuum framework. It's located there. It's becoming actually now the description of what we have done over a period of more than 25 years as Indigenous leaders in the field of mental health and mental wellness and substance use. And it articulates what we have actually described as this mind that is the Indigenous mind and Indigenous knowledge about health, healing, and wellness. And in the core of it is this piece that you'll see when you go to it. You can see the core because we represent it in a circular form. But the core of it is these four concepts of hope, meaning, belonging, and purpose. And when Murray was there talking with us about suicide prevention and tied into what has happened as a result of these shifts that colonizations have impacted on our minds specifically, one of the things that he had pointed out was that there are four questions that are common questions from way back in history. Early human history and recordings of thought leaders from all around the world actually have brought about these four questions, which he pointed out are key concepts about who we are and where we come from, and the questions that we all need to ask in order to live long and good lives. And then when we can't answer these questions, we struggle with life and living a long and good life, or living a good life. And these four questions were these, and I put them in a different order, but they are: who am I? Where do I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going? And when we thought about these and we mapped it onto then four questions that the four concepts, you could see that there's a match between, where do I come from, which is meaning, or creating meaning of life. And then once you know where you come from, and there's many ways that we answer that, including from things such as our creation stories, and then understand then our teachings that also then help us to understand our history, then we start to understand more of and are more capable of starting to make meaning of life. And then it comes to who am I? And that's understanding belonging and connection. Who am I is about who are the people I'm connected to? Who's my extended family? Who are my community? These are questions all that speak to, or answers that answer the question to who am I? And that's why we also need to know who I am, not only in where I come from and as I introduce myself, but we need to understand then even this question, the answers to these questions throughout our life journey. And then there's the question of why am I here, which then leads to understanding our purpose. And we believe that everyone that comes to this life, as Creator puts us into this life as spirit in human form, that in fact we are then given purpose. And everybody and everything in life has purpose. And as humans, we have to then discover that purpose. When we actually are able to answer these three questions, we start to then be able to do what we call visioning, which is, where am I going? Be able to look forward in life and be able to see something good that I'm going towards, or something that I'm being drawn to, is being drawn towards me. So these four questions and these four essential concepts are core to living a long and good life. So this is where you find the mental wellness continuum framework, and I'll encourage you to take a look at it, because it is becoming, I think, one of the primary documents helping us to develop further the conversation about how do we develop our thinking once again around Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous health and healing and wellness. So I'm going to shift you to another one now that will now give you more of an example of our work and how this has actually been then put into practice, and specifically in our work around life promotion. This is where we then come more to the present time. And this is, so as we move now into how do we put into practice then thinking that is Indigenous thinking into our work, in our efforts in our communities to bring about health and wellness. We do believe, and I believe that this is something that is happening on a fairly wide scale now. There is a paradigm shift, or a shift in thinking, a shift from the way of thinking of the way we have been introduced and forced into in terms of colonized thinking to introducing and once again beginning to develop our thinking about such things as suicide prevention from a life promotion perspective. And what is that about? Well, I'm going to give you an example of how this came about for me well over 30 years ago, 35 years ago. 35 years ago, I was working up in Treaty 3 with Elder Alex Geed and had been invited by the chiefs of that territory. There was 13 different communities that were struggling with the loss of very young people who were taking their lives by suicide. And when they asked Alec and I to help them to determine what we can do to change that and shift the loss of life, and people's desire to end their lives, what we now refer to as we change our thinking and our words about it to what we now call premature unnatural death, which is much larger than understanding just suicide. And when that thinking came about when I began to work with Alec, and we developed what we called the Sacred Circle, Leadership for Life. And so when we did that, Alec had actually directed us to go and talk to the youth in our communities, in the 13 communities, as well as the elders, and ask them about why do they believe that they're taking their lives, or that their family members and friends and even themselves were thinking about taking their lives prematurely or earlier in what was really their intended life journey. And when we asked them about that, and we asked the elders, essentially we got the same kinds of information from them, which spoke to what I just shared with you about. They were saying essentially, we're losing our understanding of where we come from. We're losing our ability to make meaning of our lives. We're losing the ability because we're losing our culture, or we're losing our language. And as we lose these things and then lose the track of our history, we struggle to know who we are. And when we struggle to know who we are, we struggle also in relationship with each other and with all of creation to stay connected in relationship with all. And as a result, then we can't see or vision or anything ahead or be hopeful about a future. And as a result of that, then we're losing our ability to hold on to life and to address and to value life, because it just does not have essentially the meaning and the importance that it was intended to. And as we heard that, and we heard that from the elders as well, but the elders were essentially saying, yes, we see this happening to our youth, and we want to help them and share with them what we know and what we understand as our knowledge and our ways of understanding how to promote life and live a long, good life. But they don't want to know this. They don't want to learn from us. And so one of the first things that we did when we came together to look at what can we do to actually promote, to actually encourage people to live long, good lives, was to change our thinking and to shift our thinking from focusing on trying to prevent death to now focusing on how do we promote life. And this is the shift in thinking that exists within the knowledge of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing and thinking. The ways of thinking are not focused on deficit or on illness, but rather on promoting life and promoting long and good life, with the intent that if we put more efforts into promoting life, that we will then ultimately reduce those who intend to shorten their lives or not live a long and good life. That kind of thinking was introduced through the work in the Sacred Circle over 35 years ago. But then when I moved down to Southern Ontario, began working in the region of Minnesota, after a number of years of working with the communities there, John Rice and myself were invited to talk about and to look at suicide prevention from an Indigenous worldview. Because everything I had done for relatively, well, I guess for over 25 years with the Canadian Association of Suicide Prevention was all focused on life, on preventing death. And when I actually over time had come to realize, as I was thinking about what they were focusing on and how that was so different from what we had done in the Sacred Circle and what Alex had introduced us to, that I began to talk about with John what he had learned as well over his many years of working in our communities. And we then began to talk about it the way I had with Alex Skeed, which was to think about it in Indigenous perspective, Indigenous knowledge, by having him think about it, because he's actually a fluent speaker in Anishinaabe. And I invited him to then speak to it in Anishinaabe and think about it in those terms. And as he used his ways of knowing from the Indigenous language from Anishinaabe, then what he came to was then also speaking of not suicide prevention, but life promotion. And as we translated it then into English. And then we began to translate our thinking in many other ways from English into Anishinaabe, speaking to other such things as, how is it that we would do this? And that's where we came up with focusing not on suicide as described in the literature or in the approaches of suicide prevention, but actually to look at life promotion and to understand it then in the context of ending life prematurely. And so that thinking is what evolved through our work together, ultimately then formed into what we call Feather Carriers Leadership for Life Promotion. That whole idea of life promotion is interesting because at the same time as we were actually having this discussion, John and I had also done some other work nationally with a number of people who were key thinkers as Indigenous knowledge keepers from across Canada who have worked around health and healing in our communities for many, many years, including people from the mental wellness, what used to be the Native Mental Health Association, now it's the First People's Wellness Circle, as well as Thunderbird. And as we talked about what we were doing around health and wellness, and then we're invited, in fact, by the government to create an approach to new documents and new materials for suicide prevention, because we had previously had offered some work that was around suicide prevention many years ago that was utilized by our communities, but then they wanted to update it. And when they wanted to update it, we sat and started to talk, as we're doing now, about, well, what is it really that we should be talking about? And what's the ways we should be thinking about this now based on all of what we've done over 25 years? Which is now articulated, of course, in the mental wellness continuum framework. So as we talked about that, and what we ended up developing then was a website, which is referred to as the Wise Practices website, wisepractices.ca, which you can find if you go on and you Google, you'll find wisepractices.ca. If you go to that location, you will actually see within it the concepts of life promotion as we defined it then and described it in translating it from Indigenous thought, Indigenous languages into English. And then what we did was we invited, as we did that and offered those thoughts about life promotion out to our communities, we invited our communities to share with us what they understood was life promotion that they were currently engaged in and doing in their communities. And in that site, you'll end up finding then, I think we have about 10 programs now that identify what life promotion is from different perspectives from our communities across the country. And those examples then help you to understand what is it that is really life promotion. And then it provides background to both how you do this with community, as well as how you would do it with individuals. And then it also has within the site, when you come to the first page now, you'll start to see actually practical examples of how to implement life promotion with youth in our communities. There was one that the youth from 10 of our youth from across the country actually worked together to develop what's called the Indigenous Life Promotion Toolkit. So in there now, you'll actually can access information about life promotion and understanding how widely now it's being implemented and how it's shifting our thinking and our actions in delivering health promotion in our communities. It's interesting because to me, I've seen the whole concept of prevention that has evolved slowly within non-Indigenous thought. And if you look at it in the terms of the Canadian Association of Suicide Prevention, they actually describe 3 phases of intervention. They talk about prevention, intervention, and postvention. Prevention is really what we call life promotion. But the efforts to actually focus on prevention are limited the actual focus has always been and continues to be more focused on the intervention and specifically on prevention, as it is focused on preventing death as opposed to promoting life. So you'll see, actually, this is our website, but it's not actually, we're in the process of actually bringing it to updating it. I'll give you information to contact if you're interested in learning more about feather carriers specifically. But feather carriers is then one of those examples of life promotion. It's in the within the Wise Practices website. It's one of the examples of life promotion. And you can actually contact us if you're interested in learning more. The Wise Practice, the first page for the Wise Practices site. And again, it's wisepractices.ca. And you'll see when you open it, you'll have these options to go into learning about the community actions of life promotion, or you can also go into for youth. This is actually the mental wellness continuum framework as diagrammed. And if you go to thunderbirdpf.org, you actually then will be able to see both the short version as well as a long version. And again, you'll see that at the core of it, again, the concepts of hope, meaning, belonging, and purpose. Now, some of these things, of course, all evolved at the same time, roughly the same time, but they weren't necessarily, discussed collaboratively until now. As we actually have, some of these things have evolved independently, but then now we're starting to see that it's become a very large movement that's occurring in our communities and shifting thinking again, as one might suggest, to our Indigenous worldviews. In our work with feather carriers, this is one of the core pieces that we share, which comes from the Mekon's teachings, which are actually from the Anishinaabe teachings, that actually symbolizes and refers to and teaches about the stages of life. And it actually gives the full example or the teachings of how the journey of life occurs as spirit in human form, beginning with the coming into life, with Creator directing us and helping us to see life and the life journey, and our choice to then go into life and the stages of life that we go through to the point at which we then exit life and return to the spirit world. And that's just an example of the ways that our thinking is shifting back to what we know of our Indigenous knowledge and implementing it within our practice of living, of encouraging and in helping us to not only make meaning of life, but then also then to understand more about our life journey as to who we are, where we come from, and why we're here. And then ultimately to be able to see and vision down the life path, to be able to see good things that we're going towards so that ultimately we live the long and good life that we're intended to. So these are examples that you can turn to and learn a little more about, especially if you'd like to learn more about it. We offer some of these teachings through Feather Care's Leadership for Life Promotion, which is in fact the concept of promoting life and focusing on that, again, as opposed to attempting to prevent death. There's a young man that's one of the feather carriers now that has helped with the creation of the Life Promotion Toolkit for youth, and then actually offered this metaphor at a gathering when we were in Whitehorse with some of our youth in that region. And I thought it to be quite descriptive of what we're attempting to do when we're trying to shift our thinking and changing our thinking, shifting the paradigm to more Indigenous worldview of life promotion around suicide prevention. When he said, what we're really trying to do is to focus on helping people to stay grounded on Mother Earth, to stay connected to life on Earth, as opposed to going into the waters when they're attempting to end their lives and drown themselves and try and pull them out of the water. That in fact, it's much easier for us if we put our efforts into life promotion. And I think this is true of not just the example of suicide prevention. That's only one example of many that has to do with health, wellness, and healing. Because I think the shift in the paradigm that we're recommending to our indigenous ways of thinking as a primary way of forming our thoughts once again to promote health and wellness, so that we do, in fact, all live as best we can the long lives that we're intended to. So those are some of the concepts that we have been developing, sharing, and promoting. I don't know, where are we at time at this point?
We're right at time. It's 1 o'clock on the dot.
Okay, so I will share with you then. This is, if you're interested in getting connected with us about feather carriers and learning more about what we said, this is the contact. Steve Martin, the program manager, he can connect with him if you wish to learn more about it. If you have questions and you'd like to ask me anything, because unfortunately I've used all your time for questions, and I know you're all on lunch. But if you have questions that you'd like to ask, you can certainly contact me as well. That's my email for feather carriers as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Chimigwech, Yawin, to our wonderful guest speaker, Dr. Ed Connors. I know there was a lot to it, and there's a lot more that you could share, and hopefully we can get some of our staff attending some of these trainings, because I think it's really important. And I know for myself, I attended Dr. Connors' training maybe 3 years ago. I completed the program, but before that I had not thought in that frame of life promotion, right? When we're thinking about premature death, we're always thinking about kind of the negative or the deficit, but there's so much more to it, and there's so much more to life. And so it really changed the way I think about mental health and wellness in general. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Connors, and thank you everyone for joining. And I hope you guys all have a very wonderful rest of your day.